They were actually doing $1 million a month last year. Then the business went into absolute financial chaos. They're acquiring customers at $50, $60, $70 with an AOV of like $30 with a very poor retention strategy.
The marketing team is completely flying blind. They could actually just be like retargeting their customers over and over and over again. And then their ROAS looks great. And it's just because they're retargeting their own customers.
If your agency has no visibility or has never asked for your P&L or wants to have an understanding of what's happening on the financial side, that is a big red flag. Your advertisers, your marketing team could say, we have a great ROAS. And then you're looking at your P&L at the end of the month, you're like, I'm in the red. Probably three situations that they are dealing with. The hardest is that the business model is fundamentally flawed. They can't acquire customers profitably, but they also can't justify the spend with lifetime value.
First, where I want to start is sort of lay the foundation of what you most commonly see in the first pattern that you notice with these brands hitting these sort of 7-figure walls. Why do they stall? And what's the first thing that you kind of look at whenever you're talking to them and they're coming with these concerns?
Yeah, so there's usually, when I talk to an e-commerce brand, there's probably three situations that they are dealing with. One is they're underutilizing acquisition. So they're absolutely crushing it. Their numbers are really good, but they feel like, oh, we can't spend too much on ads, or, you know, they have these limiting beliefs around advertising. And usually those are the easiest brands to work with because they think, oh, we're not, you know, we can't spend that much to scale up. That's the easiest situation. Number two is they are spending a ton on ads, but it's extremely inefficient. They can't make the math work on the front end, or they don't have the LTV to back it up. And the third situation, which is the hardest, is that the business model is fundamentally flawed. So they can't acquire customers profitably, but they also can't justify the spend with lifetime value. And so those are usually the three buckets that brands fall into. And so each one has its own problem to solve to smash through that roadblock. And I'd say usually that $100,000 to $500,000 a month mark is kind of that messy middle where a lot of brands are getting, you know, tied up on that.
Yeah. What have you seen kind of in the past couple of weeks? Like, do you have any recollection or like anything that stood out to you in some of your calls that you've had with these brands that you can sort of give examples to?
Yeah, so I had a call with a brand, a massive clothing brand that's been around for a while, and they are doing great revenue. I think they do between maybe $3 and $4 million a year on Shopify and D2C. They do a lot more in retail. And they had this limiting belief around ads. They thought they had to be at like a 5x, 6x ROAS. So they've always maintained like this super small spend. And so what we had to do with them is like, look, what is your true allowable new customer acquisition cost? And what does your lifetime value currently look like? Because we ran that exercise on the call, we realized that they could spend profitably on the front end, like up to $50, $60 to acquire that customer. And also their lifetime value was like 2 to 3x in literally a year. So what that tells me is like, okay, you're playing small because you're staying in this little pocket of like $30,000, $40,000 a month in spend, thinking you need a 5x return. But if we start to scale that, yes, our costs are going to start to creep up, but you can afford that, right? So you can afford to scale up. So that's some of the mental hurdles I have to kind of tackle. So that's a good example of like a brand number one that is basically has a great brand, has limiting beliefs around advertising, doesn't know their true numbers. And so I just have to tell them, like, we have to put fuel on this fire. Yes, you're going to spend more on ads, but look, the math actually checks out. So that's an example of one brand. Another brand that is kind of in the third category, where their business model is fundamentally flawed, was a brand in the pet snack space. They were actually doing $1 million a month last year. Then the business went into absolute financial chaos. They were paying their agency last year like $50,000, $60,000 a month. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on ads. And it got into a crummy financial situation. The reason why is because the business, the unit economics, the fundamentals were flawed. So they had a very low AOV and they could not figure out how to maximize lifetime value. So they're acquiring customers at $50, $60, $70 with an AOV of like $30 with a very poor retention strategy. And so this business was in a tough spot. They kind of booked a call with us trying to figure out like, how do we get out of this? And they wanted me to come on and say, oh, this would be so easy. You know, we can handle this. We can acquire customers at $10, $20. What I didn't say is like, you are not going to be first purchase profitable. It's going to be near impossible. So you have to scale off LTV. But the issue is that they don't have cash to justify, you know, waiting till their LTV kicks in. And so what I told them, I was super real. I was like, you're in a tough spot. Like, I don't think we can truly get you that result that you need. And so I'm very clear and upfront about that to the brand. I'm not here to just like, hey, we can work with you. And then 2-3 months down the line, they're in a worse financial situation. So that's kind of like example. Number one is like the prime example of a great brand that can scale really fast. And then the other example is obviously, you know, the business model is fundamentally flawed and difficult to scale up.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think too, kind of what we've been talking about over the past few weeks of, especially like with what our offer is and what we are doing and with our team, is a lot of the time it's like what people want is a lot of action and a lot of like ad creative and deliverables and see all this stuff, where a lot of these brands that are stalling and they might have grown organically, especially like with 2020 that happened and e-com brands just being able to blow up, especially like we've worked with a lot of sports nutrition companies, supplement companies, and they blew up in 2020. And then we're talking to the founders, the owners of these, and we're able to jump into their back end and see their retention strategy. And there is nothing there. And that is like the one thing that I commonly see and we always talk about is it's those small lifts in that little amount of work that needs to be put in that is going to pay dividends over time. Just like having your flows set up and being able to test those flows and sending out email campaigns. Like they may, from the outside, they look giant and they probably are, and they're generating a lot of revenue, but sub 30% of their revenue is from retention, that's probably like one of the easiest lifts that we see in these brands. And, you know, a lot of people think retention, email, SMS is dead just because a lot of people don't check their emails. But as a consumer and as someone that is marketing, like that's probably one of the easiest lifts that we see. Do you have any take on that as well? Like, do you see that? Is that like a common thing that you see?
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of brands think they need just like more ad creatives. They need some email flow build, or like they need all these kind of deliverables and assets to scale. And that's one of the first things that we have to sit down and discuss with the new brand is that, okay, yes, of course, we need the deliverables. We need to take those actions, but why do we have to take those actions? And so that's when we work with our team. That's what we've evolved over the last like 12 to 18 months is when we work with a brand, it's not about just getting deliverables done. Like that's kind of putting Band-Aids on the issue. What we have to do first is rip through all of their main benchmarks. Not what Meta's telling us, not what Google's telling us, not even what Klaviyo is telling us. Of course, we use those metrics, but what does the business look like, right? So new customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, market efficiency ratio, acquisition marketing efficiency ratio. Let's get all those metrics on paper. And then we need to figure out, okay, what are the actions? Where are all your numbers right now? Where are they trending? And then what are the deliverables and what are the actions we have to take to solve that issue? And so, retention, a lot of brands aren't doing email at the caliber that they should. Maybe they have some flows or sending campaigns. So level one is like, can we get that brand to like 30 to 40% of top line revenue, which is great. Like that's a good leading indicator that your email is in a good spot. But with our more complex brands, our 8 to 9 figure brands, the conversation is less on Klaviyo attributed revenue. It's on time to second purchase. It's on repeat customer rate. It's on lifetime value. It's on subscription take or time, all those metrics that are way harder to, just you can send email campaigns and jack up your attributed revenue. But what does that buyer's journey look like so that we can have that stronger LTV at the end of the day? So yeah, that's the biggest thing. It's like, level one of marketing is like, producing these assets, but really where things get advanced and how we've been able to scale brands and why brands work with us for so long is because we know the business fundamentals before we just blindly take action on assets or deliverables. Yeah.
And if someone's watching this right now, I think it'd be appropriate to talk through what we actually do and how we're able to understand these metrics and numbers within a business at the P&L level and stuff like that. We always talk about is letting the financials actually guide the decisions. So do you want to give them a little bit of insight of what we built over the past, this year, and how we're able to dive into a business and understand their key metrics and have that guide our decisions.
Yeah. I'm absolutely fired up because over the last 12 to 18 months, we've completely changed the way that we work with brands. And it's because the game just continues to get more difficult. So if your agency has no visibility or has never asked for your P&L or wants to have an understanding of what's happening on the financial side, that is a big red flag. One of the big things that we did in the last probably 6 to 12 months, we asked all of our brands to give us P&Ls. Why do we want that? It's because at the end of the day, that's what actually matters. That's the biggest scorecard for your business that tells us, are you actually scaling? And so what we did is now a lot of our growth is focused on forecasting from the P&L. So what revenue levels do you have to hit? Let's build a demand plan. How much in marketing spend do we have to spend? What do the numbers have to look like from there? Your acquisition costs, what is your lifetime value trending? And so everything stems from the P&L, the actual health of the business, to the marketing plan. Some brands ask, like, what's the number one reason that, brands, parted ways with TVG? And I'd say, hey, sometimes they take things in-house, but the other reason is sometimes they get in this financial cash flow issue. That's what we saw like 12 to 18 months ago. So what we figured out is, how do we combat that? Like, let's make sure we're looking at the same numbers, because your advertisers, your marketing team could say, we have a great ROAS, and then you're looking at your P&L at the end of the month, you're like, I'm in the red. And so that's a big initiative. So everything we do is rooted through P&L level focused growth. From there, we deploy all the marketing strategies to lead up to the P&L. So level one, first step, we have to look at the P&L. Level two, or step two, is building out all the growth metrics, your metrics I keep talking about, your NCAC, et cetera. Understand how much of your customer base is returning versus new. Those metrics, which aren't impacted by in-platform data. And then, what does the in-platform data and what do the metrics have to look like on the Meta, Klaviyo, Google side, Shopify side to get us to that end goal? And so that was a big change that you're not going to get from most agencies, but it's required if you actually want to scale.
Yeah. I think this will be a whole podcast on its own, because Zach, our COO, our other business partner, has been building out so many things on the back end, especially with his initiative. He's making a software called Maverick that we're actually integrating into all of our clients' back end. That's a Shopify app that's actually able to plug in, understand all the financials of Meta, Klaviyo, everything kind of going on, and we can understand from day one what those key metrics are and where they're, going to move towards. And on my side too, kind of like what I've been seeing and how I think that's super important, is a lot of these brands that we do work with, and once we actually dive into their team and understand what their marketing department looks like, a lot of these people they don't even have KPIs that are tied to anything in performance. Like, the marketing team is completely flying blind. The CMO is just giving direction to the creative team, to the email team, to the media buyer, just based off of feeling, where they could actually just be like retargeting their customers over and over and over again on Meta. Like 90% of their ad spend could be going to their current customers that were already going to be purchasing. And then their ROAS looks great, and it's just because they're retargeting their own customers. So I think that's something that's super huge. If you are, a leader in your marketing department, on your marketing team, that you really are understanding these metrics and tying the KPIs to your team members, to the actual what's going to drive revenue, what's going to grow profitable revenue. Because I know we're saying revenue now, but it really matters, revenue growth, if it is profitable revenue, because at the end of the day, we're here to, make money. But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about it. But do you have any last thoughts about this sort of 7-figure wall topic before we move on?
No, I mean, the last thing is, and we're talking about profitable revenue, it's like, we have to figure out what the brand's goals are. And this is something that, brand wants to say, every brand wants to grow. So there's different ways of doing that. And we have to get very clear on their expectations at the beginning of partnering with the brand. So for example, we've been throwing up, funnel hacks of IM8, Groons, all these big brands that are making headlines, and they're executing strategy really well. All the fundamentals, the deliverables, the assets, the landing pages, the creatives, the emails, all that's great. And so the other big variable here that's not as sexy to talk about is their cash flow position and the capital that they have to work with, right? So those brands are hyper scale, hyper growth. Investors, VCs, P for whatever, they're looking at the CAC to LTV and they're looking at the long game. So what these brands do is they execute all the marketing fundamentals perfectly, then raise a ton of capital, put fuel on the fire so that they can afford to acquire customers. So they just pump it, right? And so I can guarantee 100%, like they're not first purchase profitable, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not looking at profit. Profit isn't the focus right now. They're looking at longer time horizons. So there's that situation. We have brands like that are hyperscale, sitting on capital, want to deploy that capital and scale as fast as possible because they have the cash flow and the capital to, afford that. And then we have the other side, which are the brands that, want to cash flow and be profitable, and one red month like really screws up everything. And so that's the other situation. We've had these conversations with our clients where they tell us one thing and then like they're not profitable because they want to scale really fast. And then we're like, okay, we need to readjust the strategy. We need to make sure we're prioritizing cash flow and profitability. So those are kind of the two things that we have to focus on with the brand. But I mean, like the e-commerce game requires capital. It's very capital intensive. You have your advertising spend, you have your team, your overhead, agencies. You have to the structure in which you purchase inventory and your inventory turnover rate. Like it's a really big financial game to play. And so that's like the biggest.
I think that's
game
why
we
we've
have to
been
tackle
super
with.
successful too.